When thinking about conservation, many people start thinking about protecting exotic species of plants and animals, for example, in biodiversity hotspots like the Amazon rainforest, or they think about protecting polar bears in Siberia, or cute animals like dolphins or sea turtles. But I think the most important part of conservation is thinking about what part of nature we want to protect and why. And for me, that starts in our backyard. Understanding local biodiversity is really important in our understanding of conservation and our motivation to conserve nature. So today I'm going to show you an app that is called iNaturalist, and it will help you learn about local species of plants, animals, and fungi. And you can use it, is the kind of app that is free to use and is very easy to use, so you can use it every day, whether you're in your backyard or hiking with your friends or around campus. Let's get started. Okay, so you're going to download the free iNaturalist app. It's right here. It has a little bird, a green bird, and I already have it downloaded, so I'm just going to open it. And when you open it, you'll see that it probably is going to get to your observations page. You might not have any if you've never used the program before. You might have to log in with your Gmail, with your App State Gmail, if you haven't created an account yet. And you can click on me down here below to see your observations. And then when you're ready to add another one, you're going to go to this icon in the middle that is called Observe. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to use. So I'm going to click Observe, and you can either upload a picture you've already taken, or you're going to take a new photo. So I'm going to take a new photo right here with the camera. Okay, so I'm going to take a photo of these purple flowers, for example. Right here in the bottom right corner, it says use photo, so I'm going to add it. And you can see it shows up there, and there's also a square with a plus sign, and that's to add more angles. So this allows the program to have more clues to identify what the organism is. So I'm going to take one more, zooming in a little bit more. For example there, and then you're taking photos of like a tree. You could take photos of the leaves, of the flowers, of the bark, that kind of thing. Okay, so then you're going to go to where it says what did you see. So I'm going to click on that, and okay, it's going to tell me what it is, and you can see all the suggestions. This is here are top suggestions, and you can click on them. You can click on the little eye on the right, and it will tell you a little bit more about it, so you can see if that's what you're looking at. And for me, it's pretty clear that this is what I'm looking at, so I'm going to select blue phlox, and it's going to already be geotagged, so it'll know where I took the photo and the time. And even if you upload a photo that you taken like a few days ago, it will still have that information on it, like when you took it and where you were. If it is cultivated, you're going to click here. This one's cultivated, so I'm going to say yes. It's like a nursery plant. If it's a wildflower or an animal, you could just leave it as no, which is the default. Okay, and then I'm going to share it, and it will show up in my observations. Okay, now what I want you to do for our project is go down here where it says projects in the bottom. Okay, you'll see that it's still syncing. If you're not in Wi-Fi, it might sync once you get back to Wi-Fi, but you've already added it. So I'm going to go down here to projects. Okay, so projects are collections of observations with a common purpose. So the purpose of ours is for you to explore iNaturalist. So I already made a project. So you're going to look for it. It's called GES1010 Web Spring 2023. You're going to click on it, and you're going to say join. You see where it says leave? For you, it will say join. I've already joined, but right there where it says leave for me, it's going to say join for you. You're going to click it. And then any photo that you take, I think it closes May 1st, maybe, the project. Any photo that you take within that time, because you're part of the project, is going to show up here. So we'll see all the photos that people in our class added. One observation now showing up in the project since it's open now. And if you go to the iNaturalist website and log in with your same email account, you go to our project, and you can also see a little leaderboard, and we can see who's taken the most photos, or like the best photos or the most unique ones. If you want, we can have a little friendly competition, but I'd like you to at least make eight different ones, and they can be cultivated or wild. Just make sure you mark them. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys find. As you can see, I'm part of other projects like the App State BioBlitz Spring 2023, one that uses ginkgo leaves, the fossil atmospheres, to provide data about climate change, things like that. But you don't have to join any projects to use iNaturalist. You can literally just open the app, click observe, and either upload a photo or take one, and it will just post as part of your observations. And if it meets the requirements for any of the projects that you're a part of, then it will also be added to the project as well. So for example, the App State Spring BioBlitz ends on April 31st. And if you take any of the photos for this project within the App State boundaries, within the campus, then it will be posted in your class project and also in the App State one. So even though you haven't necessarily joined the App State one, that one is open. So anyone that takes photos within App State, they will show up. But our class one is only for our class. So I have made it so that only members of the project can post here. Okay, so you do have to join. So I hope you enjoy using the app. I would like you to add 8 observations to our project. Okay, and they can be of any animals, plants, or fungi. All right, and if you have any questions about how to use it, let me know. It is a great app. It is really neat for just every day figuring out what animals and plants are around you. I really like it. So hopefully you will enjoy it too. Let me know if you have questions. And now for our last content lecture. I just wanted to feature here this 23-year-old Ugandan climate activist, hopefully to inspire you to get involved in anything, whether it's conservation or something related to your major. I hope you get out and get involved in either local initiatives or global initiatives, because there's so many great ones for young people to get involved in. And I have included some links. There's lots of opportunities through App State, for example, through the Community Engaged Leadership Office, but also in Boone, through organizations such as Mountain True. And I also included a video called No Experience, Build Your Science Resume at Home, of things that you can do for free at home to add to your resume. Let's get started. A quick question for you as a warm-up. Which of these is an example of supporting ecosystem services? Is it carbon cycling, carbon sequestration by wetlands, filtering of water by soil, or pest control by bats? And the answer is carbon cycling. All the others can be replaced by technology and are useful but not critical to our survival. Okay, so to recap from the previous lecture, biodiversity is important because species have intrinsic, instrumental, and economic value to us. Scientific management of conservation programs is critical. For conservation to be effective, it needs to be based on data and not emotions. We went over types of ecosystem services again and emphasized that protecting biodiversity means allocating resources. I wanted to play this 2.5-minute video summary of the importance of biodiversity. So check it out. last lecture, I left you with a question. How do we put a dollar amount on ecosystem services in different species? Because protecting the species at all costs is not a reality. What do we do in cases like the one we discussed related to big trophy hunting, for example? Or how about this one where there's a unique male white giraffe in Kenya? How much money should we invest in protecting this giraffe? The amount of money that it costs to fit it with GPS trackers? How many people we pay yearly to take care of the giraffe and the monitoring? Where should this money come from? And why are we protecting this white giraffe in the first place instead of, say, the earthworms in the soil? I mean, this giraffe would not last long in nature. It would probably get eaten pretty quickly. Are we just protecting it for our own pleasure? And if so, shouldn't we be investing these funds in things like wetland restoration or soil sustainability? These are difficult questions to answer. But they need to be answered because conservation costs a lot of money. A recent study estimated the cost of global conservation to be $78 billion a year. This is how much money we need to spend to protect the species and habitats that are in the most need of conservation efforts. Here are some specific examples of conservation costs. So removing 3,100 barred owls that were outcompeting the northern spotted owl added up to $8.5 million. Helping the condor recover in California cost the state $35 million. And reintroducing gray wolves in Idaho and Yellowstone came up to between $10 and $20 million. But then these investments are made because protecting biodiversity has economic benefits. So for example, it is estimated that outdoor recreation, an example of the benefits of cultural ecosystem services that we talked about, brings in $800 billion a year in the US. And bird watching tourism specifically accounts for 41 billion with a B dollars of that total. Who knew? Maybe if you're a bird watching fanatic, you probably do. So spending $8.5 million on protecting the northern spotted owls definitely seems worth it for an industry that brings in so much money. We call the different categories of ecosystem services again: provisioning, supporting, regulating, and cultural. If you're not familiar with the different categories by now, please make sure to spend the time understanding them. Let's look at 3 different ways in which dollar amounts are placed on ecosystem services and by default on protecting biodiversity. The easiest approach to understand is the value chain economic assessment, which integrates the market value of a good and the value of other things linked to its production. This type of valuation method is suitable for placing a value on specifically provisioning services. So for example, fisheries contribute $624 billion to the global economy a year, which includes not just the value of the seafood itself that we consume, but also the jobs that commercial fisheries bring, the equipment sale, boat building and repair, recreational fishing, and food processing. So how does value chain valuation work? So it involves the analysis of a series of steps that are required to bring a product or service to market. And this is based on the supply and demand of limited resources. So for example, see this value chain for the lithium batteries for electric vehicles. It includes the mining and processing of raw materials, in this case lithium, the actual manufacturing of the different parts of the battery, the electric vehicle manufacturing, and also the recycling and disposal of waste. All of these need to be considered in placing a value on the lithium as a natural resource. The second approach is called replacement cost, and it entails exactly what it sounds like. This method is used to estimate how much it would cost to replace an ecosystem service with an artificial one. So for example, the supply of clean water to New York City from the Catskill Mountains is a regulating ecosystem service. To replace it would cost $8 billion a year, and this includes the construction and maintenance of a water filtration plant to service the same amount of people that get clean water naturally from the Catskill Mountains. So the value of the filtering that happens as water flows through the Catskill Mountains to New York City is about $8 billion a year. The third method is called stated preferences versus revealed preferences, or contingent valuation. This approach is based on people's preferences. Stated preferences are what people say they would do, and revealed preferences are what they actually do. So this requires surveying a large number of people, asking them how much they would be willing to pay to see one environmental condition realized over another. So how much they would pay to save the rhino from our case study from being killed, for example. An economic study concluded that the value of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, based on people's willingness to pay to save it, is about $1 billion. And a study in 1997 valued all the Earth's biomes at $33 trillion. Let's look at an example of willingness to pay for ecosystem services, this valuation method. So this comes from a real study of questions that were asked of people in Europe, just to give, that's why it's in euros, just to give you an idea of how this kind of surveys work. People were asked to select an option from the three. So in the first scenario, they would pay 15 euros a year, which is about $16, and see 7 pairs of vultures, 6 forest fires, and a reduction in meadows and crops, and 2 quality local products. Okay, so that would cost them $16. They could also choose the second scenario where they could pay 75 euros. So this was the most expensive option, about $80 a year. But this will give them an increase in meadows and crops, only 2 fires a year, and 6 quality products, as well as 15 pairs of bearded vultures. And then there's an in-between option for 45 euros, about $49. So this is just one way of doing this type of survey. But if you want to learn more about this, and it's a whole field of study, I suggest one of these courses that are available at App. So there's cost benefit and environmental policy courses. They're all listed here, so you can go back and look at them. I've also listed environmental regulations courses and others of interest, like environmental ethics, for example. So make sure you check them out to learn more about this topic. So there are, of course, criticisms to valuing ecosystem services, to putting a dollar amount on them. From the ethics perspective, we have a duty to preserve biodiversity because life has intrinsic value in and of itself. There's also the fact that ecosystem services don't always benefit humans. So for example, restoring and protecting wetlands means more mosquitoes, which can bring disease. And some species seem expendable because they lack economic value. But does that mean we should destroy them? Sometimes developing artificial alternatives also makes it harder to justify spending a lot of resources protecting the original source. So for example, when Taxol, an anti-cancer drug, was developed, the Pacific yew tree was no longer necessary for providing extracts used in previous drugs. So even though it's not the only way we should value life, ultimately valuing ecosystem services in this way, putting a dollar amount on them, provides a more objective tool for decision making. So we're aware of the negative impact that some of the human activities are having on biodiversity. And we know how important ecosystem services are to our survival, ecosystem services that are provided by this biodiversity. So the question is, how do we protect biodiversity? Let's look at some ways. The first government attempt to protect biodiversity in the United States was the creation of the national parks, the first one being Yellowstone in 1872. And these are areas of scenic, historic, or scientific interest that are protected and maintained by the federal government through the National Park Service. And do you know how many national parks are in North Carolina? There are actually 10 national parks in North Carolina, and there's also 41 state parks. National recreation areas are places that conserve and provide recreation. These are usually around reservoirs created by large dams. For example, what you're seeing here, which is Glen Canyon. The next category of protected land is the National Wildlife Refuge. There are more than 560 around the country, such as Pelican Island Refuge in Florida, and they're managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's actually quite a few in North Carolina, including the Pocosin Lakes Wildlife Refuge, the Alligator River, and Cedar Island. We also have four national forests in the state, including one right in our backyard, the Pisgah National Forest. And these are maintained by the U.S. Forest Service. And they serve for harvesting timber, for recreation, and also for wildlife conservation, of course. The highest level of protection for terrestrial biomes is the Wilderness Area and Scenic River designation. These areas are protected by the National Wilderness Preservation System and Wilderness Act of 1964 and are kept as wild as possible. Any kind of structure like bathrooms, picnic shelters, roads, and motorized transportation in these areas is prohibited. There's 750 wilderness areas and 200 scenic rivers in the United States. And then we have aquatic and marine protected areas, which cover the protection of shorelines, lakeshores, and islands. For example, the Cape Hatteras National Seashore would be one example of protected marine area. There's also very large marine protected areas and marine reserves throughout the world, as you can see here. And in addition to these, the UNESCO, so the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, establishes World Heritage Sites. You might have heard of them. You might have even visited some of these. These are areas that have been designated as having outstanding value to humanity. And there are actually about 160,000 marine and terrestrial World Heritage Sites, including things like the Statue of Liberty, Iguazu Falls, and the Great Barrier Reef. You can check out more of these on the map linked here, and maybe even create a really neat bucket list for yourself. So protected areas like these are important tools for conserving biodiversity, but they have limitations in terms of protecting wildlife. So for example, how do you protect salmon in the ocean, which are not going to stay in one particular area? How do you protect wolves that might wander off a park? But understanding these limitations of protected areas helps us come up with more efficient ways to minimize them. One challenge is known as the ecological island effect. And this refers to the vulnerability of species that are in an isolated protected area surrounded by unprotected areas. The ecological island effect can lead to things like increased stress, disease, and higher likelihood of inbreeding and reducing genetic diversity. So you have these little patches where the wildlife are protected, but they're small and they're kind of isolated from others. One solution that is commonly used here are what are called wildlife corridors, connecting protected areas, which help the safer movement of animals and plants between protected areas. And sometimes these are over or under passes for wildlife to protect them from roads. And looking back at the case of the new fossil fuel exploration license in Namibia, while the Kagavango Basin, where the oil and gas reserves are, has protected national parks, and the drilling would not happen within them, you can see on the map that the proposed exploration is right between the national parks. And this means it would hinder the movement of animals between the two as they travel along these wildlife corridors. Another challenge of protected areas is that most national parks were established before critical species of animals and plants were identified. And so they might fall outside national parks. Protecting new vulnerable species requires long-term funding for ongoing research and monitoring. And the protection of vulnerable aquatic ecosystems like wetlands is something that is still catching up to land-based protected areas. Enforcement is another challenge surrounding protected areas. It takes a lot of resources to enforce protected area regulations. This is particularly challenging in poorer countries, which have some of the world's most important ecosystems. Indigenous populations often occupy these areas and have been displaced in the past. So for example, there used to be 26 indigenous tribes that lived in Yellowstone before they were displaced. Some solutions to the problem of enforcement in protected areas includes partnering with indigenous populations so that they can help co-manage protected areas, allowing the sustainable use of the land for traditional hunting and fishing, supporting local tourism, and compensating for not extracting certain resources. And very often, even when progress has been made by a country towards their conservation goals, for example, by passing stricter environmental regulations, changes of government could mean that protections for ecosystems could be rolled back or removed altogether. So, for example, when President Trump came into power in the United States, he rolled back over 100 environmental policies and regulations, including things like weakening the Endangered Species Act. And when Bolsonaro became president of Brazil in 2019, the country saw the greatest increase in deforestation for a decade due to lack of enforcement of regulations. With new President Lula's victory in 2022 in Brazil, came renewed hope for the protection of the Amazon rainforest and for climate action. Some of the most important national and global laws protecting biodiversity are listed here, including the Endangered Species Act of 1973 and the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species, which is abbreviated as CITES, CITES. Other examples of ways we can reduce the biodiversity loss are through sustainable forest management, which includes strategies like increasing canopy cover with a greater diversity of type and size of species, planting native trees, promoting the importance of forests among the public, and using GIS tools to maintain updated records of species distribution and changes. There are also GIS tools available for the public to learn about forest management and the state of the world's forests, like this Global Forest Watch interactive dashboard. So check it out if you're interested. And this chart illustrates the complex network of people and roles that need to work together to create and facilitate a sustainable forest plan. So there's many people and entities involved. And you can support sustainable forestry too by looking for the Forest Stewardship Council FSC certificate for businesses on products you buy. The last example of challenges for protected areas that I will discuss here is what is known as the edge effect. And the edge effect refers to changes in environmental conditions at the boundaries where two or more habitats come together. These edges create vulnerabilities for communities of organisms that live there, as they are more exposed to predators and human interactions, as well as abiotic factors like wind, sun, and forest fires. It's important to be aware of these fragile edge communities and to avoid creating more edges through fragmented habitats. And these fragmented habitats are due mainly to patchy deforestation. The management of natural resources with an awareness of local biodiversity ensures that human needs are met while also conserving wildlife. So grass and grassland management, for example, requires careful monitoring. While grazing of herbivores is actually beneficial because it promotes grass growth, helps spread seeds, and also helps to fertilize soil, livestock can upset the balance because they eat too much grass, and they upset this balance between grass growth and decimating the whole grassland by not allowing time for it to recover. But careful monitoring and informed agricultural practices means you can have both grass for cattle and grassland for other organisms that live in that ecosystem. Other agricultural practices like planting shrubs and shade-tolerant plants like coffee, which will provide habitats for other species within cropland, and also retaining wildlife corridors between native ecosystems will help to protect both the biodiversity while still maintaining the ability to grow crops. Another way to protect biodiversity while still meeting other human needs is through land planning. And this is done at both the local and the state level through zoning ordinances, which dictate what type of building can go where in the town, and through building codes. So for example, how tall can the building be? How many people can live in it? What type of waste management is the building going to have? How about water sourcing? Having zoning ordinances that restrict land use and the activities allowed in different areas of each town prevents urban sprawl and protects green areas such as parks, greenways, and nature reserves. So, what can be done to fix some of the existing damage to habitats and biodiversity? Well, nature is resilient and will recover if allowed time to do so. Conservancy organizations like land trusts and state and federal agencies often close areas that have been impacted by human activity in order to allow for them to recover. There may be a need for active habitat restoration to fix some of the damage done, for example, by planting native trees along riverbanks in places where construction has destroyed natural streambeds and wetlands, or by creating intentional spaces to encourage the breeding of native birds or salamanders. Dr. Jane Goodall said it beautifully in this quote: "Fortunately, nature is amazingly resilient. Places we have destroyed, given time and help, can once again support life, and endangered species can be given a second chance. And there is a growing number of people, especially young people, you guys, who are aware of these problems and are fighting for the survival of our only home, planet Earth. We must all join before it is too late." And for now, I'm going to leave you with this quote: "In the end, we will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." I hope you continue learning about nature.